I had the good fortune of being able to be present at the Rodarte show that happened last week during New York Fashion Week, which was quite extraordinary. And I was hoping that we could start, Laura, by talking a bit about that show and also the difference between producing that sort of show and the sort of show you've produced upstairs, both of which had to happen in a single week.
Well, with the show here, we started talking about it in October, which is a lot earlier than we talk about a show for Fashion Week. And we worked with Gregory and Matt Mazuka, who did the staging for upstairs, so he did the set design kind of. Both shows make use of basically a producer. You have to kind of create a world. And with the one here, I think it was nice because, well, I think that you have to go into each space and know what you're working against and what you can't touch. And I know that they have a lot of rules at the Cooper-Hewitt because it's they have to keep everything fire safe. And at our show downtown, they kind of just break a lot of rules to make things happen. But I guess the real difference is that I don't know. There's a larger audience for during Fashion Week, you know, sitting there for this one moment, the last 10 minutes, and you kind of just have to make everything happen at a frantic pace, and everyone's super paranoid backstage, and you can't really check everything as much as you want to. And here, everything's very deliberate, and it's just stationary, and you can make things as perfect as you want. So I think that's the main difference. I don't know.
Was it difficult to have to go back and revisit your archives and put together vignettes from that when you're also very focused on going forward? I mean, do you slightly go back and be like, we made that, you know, as you move forward? Or does every collection retain its kind of integrity and drama for you?
Oh, no, definitely not, because I looked back at a lot of things and thought, oh my God, it was so embarrassing. But once we talked to Gregory more about what the show needed to be and realizing that it's, you know, just kind of like a capsule and not meant to be a retrospective or anything like that, it was very easy to say, this is what it should be, because they had to have a theme. And the theme was decay and ruin, and kind of how we saw that running through our collections. And then, and I think what was really nice is because we were so obsessed with color, thinking about if you put all the colors that we had used upstairs, it would be a little much. So it was like the idea was to have one colored piece, and then the things that were more pared back leading up to it. So it became very easy to say this wouldn't work, as opposed to saying one of my favorite dresses isn't in there, but it just couldn't be up there.
At what point in your collections, and then we'll get back to your new one, at what point did you start looking for clothes for this show? Because you don't have pieces from your very, very early showings there. And I'm wondering, is there a moment where you felt your work had developed to a point where, because all of your collections have a set of skills that you're working through with them. And then at what point did you do a collection where you thought, we've got it going on, this is one where we can start thinking everything was in place and it would stand up to a museum?
I think that the one that I felt most confident about for the first time was our fall 2008 collection. And there were still things I look back at it and I pick on it a lot in my mind, but there's things that I think are fundamentally representations of things that we would want to do, and we finally felt like, oh, we got that right. So I think with that collection I was most proud of for the first time.
And just explain to people who weren't there, what were the signatures in that collection that made it that way for you?
Well, the season before that we discovered we work with this amazing dyer, and we'd never really been happy with color. And we went and, we had this idea of, well, the collection was based off of Japanese horror films and this idea of a ballerina and kind of the mixing of those two worlds. And so we really wanted to use the color red. and make these dresses that look like they were splattered in blood, but we didn't want them to look like you'd thrown color on them. So it was taking just different images of flowers where the red is on tips, or different images from, there's this one Korean horror film called Tale of Two Sisters, and there's these white nightgowns with like the red. And I think that it was just the idea of having color saturation to look really natural. And so it was getting to a point where you could use a process and have this come across. And then we had a lot of knit wear in that collection, which I was really excited about. And these shoes, the shoes were really tall, and they had these huge spikes on them.
And that's remained. You've almost always now done a tall shoe, if not spiked.
Yeah, they're all upstairs.
Eccentric.
Yeah.
Now, so moving forward, the collection just done that will go into stores for the fall.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, at the same time, this was actually funny because I was talking to everyone at the Cooper when we were doing this. Our friend invited us to go to Marfa, Texas for a Halloween, party. And so you fly into El Paso and you drive from Texas, that point in Texas to Marfa, so it's about 3 hours. And you kind of feel like you're driving to the end of the earth. There's nothing there. Nothing. There's this little town called Valentine, and it's about 20 houses, and there's a little library and a post office that apparently that you can send your postcards to get postmarked there. So for Valentine's Day, you might want to do that. And then, and everything's, wrecked, but it's really beautiful. And then when you get to Marfa, it's kind of like, lazy, and you just want to sit on someone's porch and not do anything. And from the point of driving to getting there, Kate and I only listened to 50s music. And we were just kind of really, I don't know, there was just something about this empty space that we were really, really obsessed with, and the idea of seeing, just like you would drive by and you'd see Juarez, you'd see the border towns. And I don't know, Kate and I just started talking about things that, we grew up with, or I was talking to my friend Nicholas that I just saw walk in, about what he felt growing up like being, coming from a partly Mexican-American family, and the way you see colors, and that immediately in our minds led to the 50s music and the space we were looking at. And so, in our convoluted way, it got to the idea of sleepwalking and getting dressed in the night and going to work at a factory.
With pearls.
Yeah, with pearls.
With pearls and really, really high heels.
Yeah.
And in the last few years, you've traveled a lot through these kinds of American landscapes. Didn't you go to some ghost town where no one had ever, no one goes there, and you were in some crazy old house? What were you telling me about that one?
Where were we going? Well, Death Valley. So we went. There's a lot of places in California to go to, you can get to in an hour or 3 hours, and it feels like no one's ever there. But Death Valley is amazing because it's basically the lack of any imprint. And you'd think that it was prehistoric just because there are no leftovers. There are a few ghost towns outside with, little one mining bucket, and they're like, oh, it's, this big, place that people visit. And outside of it is this place called the Armagosa Opera House and Inn. And basically what happened was, I guess in the 20s, there were a lot of borax mines. Keep in mind, Death Valley up until the 30s was the hottest place on the face of the planet, recorded. So the temperature there is just extremely brutal, and you can go in the winter and it's still 100 degrees. And all the miners just used to live there without a place to stay. So I think a writer came down and wrote an expose about the borax mining company and how it was unfair to the workers. And they lived out in tents, and they built this inn. And it was kind of treated like a dormitory for the workers. And now they basically say it's haunted because it's been deserted, and there's 2 people that live in this. It's a town. There's 3 people that live there. And there's the sheriff that works at the inn, and then there's this lady named, gosh, I can't remember her name off the top of my head for some reason. But Martha Beckett, and they actually made a documentary on her that was nominated for an Oscar. I found out later, but she runs an opera, and they play every Saturday, and she's been there since like 1957, and she walked into what was considered the town hall. She had traveled from New York and was a ballerina and said, you know, I've got to build my theater here. So she walked into this space that was completely deserted, and she painted a mural. It's filled with all these Renaissance figures, and you go in, and so she's been doing these pantomimes, and she used to do them on point, but she's like 87 now, so she stopped doing it. But she still performs.
And who comes to her with her 3 people in the town? I
think everyone that's traveling through the area. There's a lot of people from like Germany, I noticed, in Death Valley, and and they have like, I don't know, she's magical. I think just the way she talks about people, and all of her pantomimes are kind of about the figures that she's seen come in and leave the town, but for whatever reason she is meant to be there, and yeah, she's incredible. And it's haunted, so that's the other part. Like there's major hauntings in that building.
And didn't you just go to the Badlands? Didn't you?
Yeah.
When you were doing Target?
Mm-hmm. So they asked us, where do you foresee doing an ad campaign? And you know, they're like, well, maybe someone went to Tahiti or something. We're like, can we go to North Dakota? But that was incredible too, because there's another place where you know, you see miles. You have nothing but wheat fields, like a horizon. It's a wheat field and then the sky, and that's it. You look far, and there's no hills, there are no trees sticking out and breaking the lines, and so it's really probably the most magical place I've ever been. It's so beautiful. And then I just, you know, had these panic attacks thinking about what it was like during the winter there, and then there was a farm we stayed. We didn't stay there, but where they were doing the shoot, they were on someone's farm. And the family had been there. They raised 30 children in this one house. And she would come out every morning.
Children?
Yeah, over the years. It wasn't just
they were spaced out.
Yeah, they were spaced out, and it was different generations.
Okay.
Different generations.
Okay.
Like it wasn't
different
just one.
Mothers were
yeah.
going. That's good.
And they had, she would make us food every day and bring it out. And she talked about how they had these little, I can't remember, she gave me one, but they had, they were known for doing this because in their family, one snowstorm, they sell their wheat, and every time they sell their wheat, they give out a medallion, and I can't remember what saying it is. And the reason why they started doing it is because one time someone bought their wheat, and they took it home, and there was like the largest snowstorm they had ever had, and every place was ruined except for this one person's house that had bought the wheat and gotten the charm. So now it's like their tradition. So she gave us them. So hopefully my house will never be ruined.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How much do you, as a child, did you travel in the States with your parents in this way, or is this these kinds of locations and this kinds of venues? You always seem to be seeking out places that no one's been to in a really long time, and there's not much there, and then finding sort of the ghost story.
I think, well, we grew up in Aptos, which is outside of Santa Cruz in Northern California, and I lived there most of my life. And then we lived in I was actually born in Ohio, and I think my parents lived there for a year or something. And then I grew up in Northern California, and then we moved to Alabama. And then, so we kind of, in that space of transitioning, we'd always drive. And then my dad was obsessed with lakes, so at one point, like the big family. I mean, we always had to do adventures, whether it was like flying or hot air ballooning or having an RV, and then finding the places you could go. So we saw a lot.
You had an RV?
Yeah, we had an RV.
Where'd you go?
Every lake in California.
Lake Shasta?
Yeah.
Mount Lassen?
Yes, we went to and then they had, my dad went so far as one year we got our tonsils out, Kate and I, and you're not allowed to get your ears wet. I can't remember there's a link in there. And my dad planned this big family trip around these lakes, and my mom was so mad, but he wouldn't change it. So Kate and I just played Barbies and paper dolls And then, you know, had that hot pink zinc on our faces because we couldn't go in the water. But yeah.
You know, it's a funny thing because I think for a lot of people who work in fashion, say as I do, there's something in the American fashion world that's very, I would say that Rodarte is positioned as a brand that's speaking to a European fashion aesthetic, or it's a kind of show people will say that, you know, you would have once seen in, you know, you would see in Paris, or you would expect to see, you know, not just in New York. It's an amazing show to see in New York, but that it's in New York is special because it has a level of kind of aesthetic freedom and rigor and drama around it that has often been seen as the province of European designers. And you guys are hugely, hugely popular with foreign publications, and, you know, are sort of, you know, it's not just big in Japan, it's, you know, it's big in France, it's big. And I'm wondering, I mean, how much you and Kate see yourselves as specifically American designers, because so much of your inspiration is really, it's not based on the history of fashion in Europe, it's based on American landscapes.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I think there's a tendency to do things, if I had to break it down, I think maybe the European side to it is that we're slow and we think a lot about what we're doing, and in that allows us a freedom to be very detail oriented in how things are made. And then we really love things that are beautifully made, so it's kind of like, I feel like those things that are treasured in Europe are come across in the way we'd want to build something. But I think we're very American in our tendencies in other places, definitely. I don't know, I just don't see that big of a difference between European and American, because I kind of just think it is the same. It's just if someone chooses to, you know, be aware of their environment, then you kind of would have the same reaction to anything wherever you are. And I guess it's just maybe the way that, you know, you respond to your environment and your surroundings. And I guess that kind of comes, so it seemed very American to me to, you know, to want to tell a story about, you know, your backyard. I don't know. But I think that, you know, American artists have always done that, and that, you know, so much amazing art has happened in California that over the last 100 years that you could probably work your entire life off of.
What's your favorite artistic creations from California? What inspires you most?
Well, I mean, Kate and I have always been obsessed with the redwoods in Northern California. I don't have all of my memories kind of come from feeling very small, and then thinking about these trees that are so large and make you feel, you know, you'd believe in fairy tales if you were little because of these places. You knew, you're like, how do trees look like that? And the space is completely, you have a different relationship to shadow and light because everything looks like kind of hazy and magical, and these trees are just larger than you could even imagine. And when you go back, if you're older, they're still as large, so you don't feel like there's that discrepancy, you know, with the childhood memory and something that you saw later on. I think that affected us the most. And then we were always in Monterey, and they have this amazing aquarium, and they have tide pools, and those I was obsessed with too, because you'd see all these beautiful colors and like delicate little animals, and they'd be like hot pink and white, and they look like, I don't know, materially you couldn't describe to someone. I still can't, so I don't know. Things like that seem to have definitely informed the way I would look at anything.
And so California itself has stayed vivid to you your whole life. Because you haven't left it for a significant, you went to college there.
Stayed in for college, and we were only in Alabama for 2 years. But I think that was, you know, 2 years is enough to have changed my life. So it was
What
probably,
were the years? How old were you?
it was my first 2 years of high school, and Kate's middle 2 years. And I mean, I, definitely wasn't having a lot of friends anywhere I lived when I was in high school. So, and Kate the same. We were kind of on cloud nine about it. But it was, I didn't know anything about the South, and I didn't. But if you're there, you read Faulkner in 9th grade, and you can actually understand it because it's just a different. I always thought when I was reading certain novels, I thought I get them so well just by being here that any eccentric personality or any belief in this idea of like the land and the blood and like the soil, it's really just ingrained there, and it's such a beautiful way of thinking that you kind of can just revel in it. Like you just stay thinking about that lifestyle, and you don't need to. People don't need to change. Like it's just that slow. So it's really beautiful. And then we got to come back to California, and then we were living in. My parents are from Pasadena and Sierra Madre, so we moved back there instead of Northern California. And then I never really went into LA until after college, so I was just in Pasadena.
And in Pasadena, what was the sort of social milieu of Pasadena then? What did you move back to? Was a new place?
I think you have Caltech, and so there are a lot of like science, a lot of focus on science, and you have like JPL, where they do a lot of, it's the Jet Propulsion Lab that Jack Parsons did. And basically there's just like a huge focus on that side of the industry. And then you have a lot of older ladies that dress in minks in the middle of the summer. and so it's just kind of that mix.
It's a funny thing because a lot of designers, I would say, I mean, in my years of interviewing designers, so many of them are fully influenced by their sort of life at age 13. So much of their aesthetic, and often I'd say this, I think the male designers who remember very specifically what their mother wore when they were age 13. But it's that sort of pre-adult fantasy of what the adult life will look like, and what it's going to look like maybe as a reaction against what it looks like to you, or however you work it. And so to have moved in high school, it would reanimate California to you while you're in the South, and it would animate the South to you when you come back to California. Yeah. It has a very specific, although it must have been utterly miserable, it has a very kind of specific
It was totally miserable, and only now that you actually are very happy you did it. And I had a Southern accent through college. And
at Berkeley.
At Berkeley, so it was pretty good. I couldn't even speak French in my French class without having
a twang?
Yes. And I actually learned French from this lady named Madame Todd. And she had like blue hair, and it was a round bowl, and she drove this old Mercedes. She was a cheerleader, like in 1960 in Auburn, that's where I lived. And she wore frosted everything. And but everything that I said, I realized in my French class was completely wrong when I moved to California. So, and I could never, but I mean, Southern French though sounds pretty good, so it's okay.
It does actually.
Yeah. I actually think someone told me the only American accents that people in France like are from the South. So.
I was once in Paris with Edmund White, and he has a very strong sort of twang to his voice actually, and it's genius in France. Everyone loves you.
Yeah.
It's like they can accept you as an American as opposed to like a New York person. But you and your sister both read a huge amount and are very bookish, and in college wrote theses for your friends that got them A's and stuff on political science and other things. They had like a business running on the side. And but when did you know that your visual imagination would start to define what you do as you grow up? Because usually people make a choice. They go visual or they go verbal.
I'm definitely not verbal.
Well, not,
yeah.
Yes, you are, because you're speaking.
I don't know. I kind of chose, well, in high school, I never thought about fashion as a career ever. It didn't seem like something I would do. I don't know why.
Did you guys sew in high school?
I did home, things that my mom taught me how to sew. But I did that in more junior high and then later on it was just like, I wore a uniform every day. And then I decided kind of in high school that I wanted to be a doctor. So then when I went to school, I was under a biology major. But I don't know if it just seemed like you make this choice and then you go for it. And then Kate kind of, one time wanted to be a creative go to school for creative writing, and then one for art, or she considered fashion too, but I don't think she ever, she was decisive enough to choose something. So that's why she ended up going to Berkeley instead of like a focused school. And then I guess you just know, because I was miserable my first year, and Kate was like, you should really just change your major. I was really bad at math, so I was having the worst time with my calculus. And then I changed it to English on a whim, just like overnight. And then I guess the only time we really talked about it was I was a junior, and we thought, well, I don't really want to do anything with this degree. And Kate said, well, I don't really want to go work at a gallery, because she was in art history. And then we knew, and that was it. And we never really had a discussion about it. Like, okay, well, let's just start a company, and then we moved home.
Okay. And it's very sort of...
That's what happened, I swear.
It's straight out of a 50s film, actually.
I know.
And then did you always have, can you describe your collaborative process for people? I know that is a central question lots and lots of people ask, because, you seem to do the same thing, and yet we know that you don't do the same thing. And has it changed over the years as your responsibilities have grown exponentially?
I think it's kind of the exact same, because Kate will rethink an idea a million times more than I will, and I'm more stubborn than she is, so I'll think, okay, that's it, and I'll want to move on, and then she'll ask me 60 times, oh, are you sure that's the right answer? And then finally, in the 60th time, I'll change my mind. So then, I think that's kind of the way we work. So we just, usually when we do a collection, we just sit down and we talk for a long time about what the idea is, and then how we'd want it to look. And then finally we'll sketch, and hopefully we can do it pretty quickly, or it'll take a long time. But this one was just pretty fast to sketch it out.
And this one has a lot of different fabrics, which I hope you'll describe. People know you often use a lot of different types of textiles. And do the ideas come first and the sketches come first, and then you find stuff to match with it? Or like when you did the collection with the cheesecloth, the last one, the condors, did you find the cheesecloth dude and then think condors burning, et cetera? How does the materials influence how you design?
Well, with the cheesecloth, it was missing the whole time. This was the really hard thing with that collection, because I felt like we had picked so many
upstairs
fabrics, and none of them were right. And we kept because a lot of the collection was about burning and ruining all these fabrics. So like we burned things and put holes and we wrecked them, and they're sandpapered. Everything was just kind of like, as much as we could do to it, we would. And then we had this part of the collection that just really needed a fabric that looked ruined, and it needed to be a certain weight so it would do what we wanted it to do. And then, I don't remember what happened, but someone was like, you should just use cheesecloth. And we're like, oh. And then we used it in every single piece in the show. And although like we dye it and do different things to it, but it was just what was missing.
But also explain about how it came from Hollywood costuming, didn't you?
Oh,
yeah. The cheesecloth.
Oh, someone
trough.
said to us, they said, oh, do you know this person? They did these Tibetan costumes for, I can't remember. Someone was talking about this costume, Wayne Finkelman, this amazing costumer. He passed away, and he was obsessed with color. And they said, do you know these Tibetan clothes he did? I can't remember the movie. I almost think it was with Eddie Murphy. And it was like his best work. Like the costume in this film are so beautiful. They're like, do you know that was all cheesecloth? Because it just made this amazing shape. And I was like, oh, that's what we need. So we had to track it down. It was cool.
And in this collection, the one that you've just shown, explain the fabrics, because you have depression prints in there. You have a lot of different types of...
I think there was a lot of things we wanted to do, partly because it was the idea of sleepwalking. Oh wait, this collection we just showed?
Yeah, the
Okay.
sleepwalkers.
Okay, so everyone asks us at the end, are those wedding dresses? I'm like, no, they're nightgowns, just so you know. So there's a lot of white. The idea was that if you could imagine a ghost story in the 50s, and you could probably imagine that because of the way it sounds, most 50s music does, the idea of something being very slow, and so we wanted a lot of things that look like bed clothing, even though we probably did it a lot more fancy, and combining that element, taking things that we thought were traditionally, what we remembered, like our grandfathers from Mexico, so like having that side of our family, the way we viewed, being Mexican American and like growing up that way. And so the floral prints came into that, wanting it to be like a lot of bright colors and things that kind of seemed off being paired together, but then having, the bright colors, but then knowing that you would have the faded ones too that maybe your grandmother would have. So it kind of like knew that we needed the ones that were paler. And those were on chiffons just because they look more delicate and see-through that way. Then the plaids, because we felt like we were having, I just think they were all the elements of things that you would have in your family. Like, your brother's sweater might be made out of cotton and not something nicer. Your grandmother's embroidery, lace that would probably run through your family, things like that. So it was like all these things that could be traditionally in a family household, but then used in every element of the clothes.
So you're out in LA, and you decide you want to find all these things. Where do you find your fabrics? Because so many designers, they go to Premier Vision, which is the fabric show, and that's how a lot of ideas start with fabrics for designers who work in that way. And you guys have the idea. How do you find the textiles, and then who keeps track of the 9 million elements that are going into every little, the garment that you're doing with the 100 pieces?
Well, we meet with mills in New York, and they all, everyone that's at the shows in Paris, they show here too, or they have a showroom. So we just kind of go to a lot of appointments, and we usually make a trip to do it. We're too small of a team to go to Paris for fabric.
How big of a team are you?
3.
Yeah, that's small.
And so, we're now 4. We have a new assistant as of January something. And so then we pick textiles, and then they send us heaps. We had so many different headers, and we just look at them and say, oh, this looks like what we want to do. And then we keep whittling it down, and then we just order our fabric.
And how did you know how to do all of that, and how did you know how to cost it, and I mean, how do you know what you could afford, what you can't afford, what's worth it, what isn't? I mean, I think this is a question for people who are maybe design students, or how do you just suddenly come out and know what you're doing?
We didn't, and it was a lot of trial and error, and we've made a lot of mistakes. And
Biggest mistake?
Biggest mistake. Well, I did something recently. We did a leather jacket, and we priced it very fairly so it would do really well in stores. And I lost so much money on it because by the time I realized what we had actually put into it, I didn't do it correctly. So basically, everyone's getting a steal on that leather jacket if they go buy it. But that was a big mistake because it actually hurt. It was bad for us. But that was pretty recent.
And when did you realize you'd made the error? After you'd shipped?
When Kate asked me.
Oh.
She's like, did you do that properly?
We now realize are not so strong in math.
She always says to me, you're supposed to double check everything you do with me. And I'm like, well, Kate, then if we did that all the time, but then I think that was when my stubborn nature was coming out because I didn't listen to her. And then I realized what happened, and then I got in big trouble.
And in terms of the people you collaborate with on all the different elements that go into the shows, you have a very strong team of people you work with a lot, or who've been, and how does that work? How did you start to find your collaborators, and how have you sort of grown together, and who have you learned from? I think this is important in the world of museums where so much is collaborative.
I feel like you can't do anything without a team of people that you artistically see eye to eye with, and for like specifically with a show, it's kind of the hardest thing because you're thrown into it last minute and you don't have very long to do it. But we work with Odile Gilbert and James Caliardos on hair and makeup, and they're always, it's such an easy dialogue, but they know now that we do more than one hair and makeup test, which I think drives everyone crazy, but we can never make up our minds. And then for the show, we work with Bureau Batak, who, like, basically we begged them to work with us a couple of years ago. We're like, please, there's a disconnect between our show and like the clothing. Like, there had to be a way of presenting it that people could understand or feel at least as much as like we'd want to put into it. And so they completely made that possible, because we'll say two things to them and they'll have a really grand idea. So it works. You know, if you can find someone that speaks the language you do, then, you know, it's very easy to make a decision. And then we've worked with various people on shoes. Like, we worked with Nicholas Kirkwood for the past 4 seasons. And he's a younger designer out of London. And I can't remember who else.
And how much do you feel I mean, what are the aspects of being part of the fashion world, and I mean, that are of interest to you? And are there other designers that you collaborate with, even as friends, or trade ideas off of? And what are the aspects that you stay away from? You don't live where everyone else lives, you know?
I think immediately there's a remove because we don't live here. So it's not by choice that you don't participate in everything, but I think it's nice that, you know, you can create and then stay in a world that's just yours. I think the only thing that we don't do, that I would do here if I were here too, is just, you don't talk about your work with anybody. Everyone has an opinion, and everyone always wants to tell you, well, I don't like that color. We made the mistake, like our best friend, his name is Johnson, and he designs too, and one day...
He does Libertine.
And one day we said, oh, I think I really like this one color, and he's like, I hate that color. And then that just ruined it. So I knew that I would never want to talk about anything until...
What's the color?
I don't even remember. We were eating, the funny thing is he took us to have vegan Chinese food in this awful place, and it was a long time ago. And so, like,
by vegans.
I know, it was just really weird. And then
they're always friends with vegans, and then
Yeah.
you're always slightly disappointed in the culinary experience
yes.
that follows.
And they, so I never wanted to, I think that's the key. Like, you don't need to talk about, I mean, if you're getting to the place where you're trying to have an idea and you have to cultivate it in some way, it's not really good to invite a lot of people in to voice their opinions about it.
Do you look
in
at
that
other
early
shows?
Stage. Like a lot later, I start seeing it, but not now. Or you end up seeing it because if you see magazine and stuff, you see it, but not really.
Do you go into stores?
I do not. Mm-hmm. It's awful. My friends are always telling me, you need to tell that store to not hang your sweater like that. I'm like, okay.
You send friends into stores to check how your sweaters are hung?
No, they just tell me. And then that's aggravating too, because everyone feels like they can give you that opinion, and then you start. But I don't really go into stores. Even though I love them, I just don't. I mean, if it's a trek to get to one from Pasadena or downtown, and it's like a 2-hour commitment. And usually it's pretty hard to do that during the time that we have at home.
And since you guys work essentially all the time, what do you do when you're not doing this?
We try to take mini vacations, which is why we'll go to Death Valley, or we're planning a trip to Ireland. That'll be fun to go on a road trip. And then we just hang out with our friends and go to movies and things.
You do craft projects and things though, don't you?
Yeah, well, we do one big one. We have a gingerbread competition every year at our friend's house. And I always lose because my friends cheat. And this year, Kate and our friend Johnson decided to rebuild their house because it wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. And then we all showed up to the there's a judging party a week later, and they had switched their house.
Thematically, they
redid it.
They're developers.
And they won.
Oh.
Yeah, so.
They flipped it.
Yeah, they did.
They flipped their house. The houses have amazing themes, but I mean, discuss some of them.
Well, our friend Autumn's theme this year was Roman Polanski's chalet, and it was like this Swiss, like filled with snow with a giant snowball attacking it. It was pretty funny. And I can't even remember, I don't know, I was paired with someone I had never met before, so ours was a Cormac McCarthy house. So there was like hamburgers all over it and like a cannibal. And then, and like a ruined bedroom. And then someone else had, someone did a pink glittery one too. I mean, they're really beautiful, so they're colorful, that's the key.
And you watch movies, right? You watch lots of movies. Mm-hmm. And so I know that when we met before Christmas, you told me that you had something like 300 items in your Amazon shopping cart. So mostly movies, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I haven't purchased any.
So the top 10, what have you not purchased? What are the 10 movies you want to watch next that you don't actually own?
That's so tough. I don't know. I'm really bad at this kind of stuff.
What are the movies you're watching now?
Well, I'm really excited. I just saw this on a thing that they have this movie for HBO called The Pacific that's going to come out, so I'm excited for that. It's basically like Band of Brothers, but on a different war.
You love Band of,
yeah, I love Band of Brothers. It's my favorite movie. Mm-hmm. It's a World War II drama kind of thing that they did.
You like essentially the History Channel.
Yes.
Old ladies in Pasadena wear mink coats in the middle of the year. Ghost towns.
Yes.
And what else fuels the Rodarte aesthetic? Which, if you've gone upstairs, creates extremely sexy body-conscious dresses with spiky shoes?
We like...
5 other things you and your sister like.
We like museums, but we only go in and out very quickly, but then we can remember everything very fast. So art and music.
Favorite bands at the moment? Favorite music at the moment?
Favorite music. There's this short album I like by the XX that I guess is really popular that I didn't know, but I really like them. And they have cool style, this guy and girl, so they're fun. Music, I don't know.
The one tip you tell people right now, what would you tell people to read, eat, drink, sleep, think about?
Well, I found this book, if you can find it too. It's called Lifemanship, and it's probably the funniest book I've ever read in my entire life.
Lifemanship?
Yeah, and it's by a radio personality from Britain from like 1943 or something. And it was this little book about how you can kind of weasel through social circumstances. So it's like, well, if your friends are really bombing in a conversation, just throw in a French phrase. You know, things like this. They're really funny. And this guy was obviously out of his mind. I mean, he must have been hilarious. So the whole book, but perfect, we gave it to Johnson.
Excellent.
So he's been studying it. I started getting all these emails with him that were half French, and I thought, Johnson doesn't speak French. What the heck is going on? And then I realized it was lifemanship.
So with that, I thought I should open it up to all of you to ask questions of Laura.
Hi, thank you very much. It was very intriguing listening to you speak. Do you have a favorite artist, visual artist, painter that you have admired through the years?
I have so many, and I have a favorite painting. I think my most favorite painting is called The Death of Morons by David. And I think that's my favorite painting. But then if I thought about my favorite artist, I would say Rauschenberg. So those two.
Could you talk a little about your work with Target? It seems like you're very, what's the word I'm looking for? Labor intensive.
Yeah.
And it just seems antithetical to what Target is all about. So how do you manage to match that up, and how long is your collaboration going to be, and did you pick a theme or did they pick one for you?
Well, what's Target? This is Rodarte for Target.
Well, I think with Target, we started, it came out in stores in December, and I think it's probably out now. They're not selling it anymore, I think. And so it was like a month and a half that it would be in stores. And we started in May last year, and then I think things were finally done in August. I think that was the timeline. And the way we approached it was to think, okay, well, we would do a collection specifically for them, not based off of our work, other places. So it wasn't like carrying over patterns or prints from things that we had done. I think that the way we thought about it was knowing the way that they had to construct something versus the way that we do. There's a divide, there's a huge divide. So I wouldn't say like, oh, I hand knit a sweater with 30 yarns and know how long that takes, that you could translate that to something that would be made very quickly and, you know, could stand on a floor with a lot of people grabbing it. And so we just thought about elements of clothing that we liked that I knew that someone should be able to get or to have in their wardrobe, which is like a really amazing cardigan that fit nicely. And we wanted to do one out of lace, for example. So I really thought about it as things that I would want personally if I were of a certain age and I couldn't get it. You know, knowing you could get it all at once, like a good gray t-shirt, you know, a shift dress that every girl kind of should have, but you wouldn't want it looking too loose because then it wouldn't look good on your body. So there were certain things that we wanted to achieve with it.
Also, I'd say you did a collaboration with Gap before when you won the Fashion Fund. When the CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund prize was announced a few years ago, and the Mulleavys were winners, the project was to do white shirts for the Gap, and you got to have massive kind of Stephen Meisel pictures of yourself plastered all over Tokyo.
We still couldn't get into the Gap party. Yeah. There was this big picture of us, and Kate and I were like, we're supposed to go to this party upstairs, and she said, I don't think so. Yeah.
But that was the first time I think you'd had to work in an industrial way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how did that go? There was a very big difference in the way you worked to that.
It was that was actually set up so differently too from the Target collaboration. That one, I think it wasn't meant to be this huge collaboration, so we had to do things over video, phone, and stuff. So it was actually really hard. But overall, it was very. I think that the thing that we learned from it very quickly was that, you know, we get our first sketch that we handed over to them. They're like, "That's a $6,000 dress." I'm like, "Oh." So then we realized, okay, well, what can you achieve if you can't? Like, it wasn't completely to, you know. If you're working with another team of people, how can you translate something? So it was just like finding the things that you knew that you could control, and then in knowing what they would be able to do for a price point and things like that. And I think that's kind of the way we worked with the items.
Because I think you had the fastest and best selling of anything that ever happened in those collaborations from the Gap. And I wonder, did you start to whittle out the technical elements, like the number of seams, or do you start to whittle out, is it the fabric, is it the seams? What's the first thing? Is it a sleeve? What's the first thing?
I think the first thing that we took out was a sleeve for the Gap collaboration, because we knew, one, I couldn't be there enough to do fittings on it. I knew that it would be a sleeve's hard. So
a sleeve is the sign of whether you can make a dress or not.
when I do a sleeve, I spend so much time doing it for a show. So I'm like, if it's like a long sleeve, it's like the thing that you fiddle with the most. So with the Gap, I knew I was like, okay, well, we're not going to be there, and so we just got rid of it. It just wasn't even something I would consider doing. And then for Target, it was different because we went through so many fittings on the clothes that it was easier to say, well, this is how we want something to fit. And there was a lot of dialogue about saying, you're not making this, you know, like they were understanding the fit we wanted, but I knew like my friends, when they got it, were like, this is like a designer fit. And I'm like, that's what, you know, that was the thing that we wanted to get to.
Because again, how does that work? Because your clothes are very, very small.
Yeah.
And Target clothes and, you know, mass brand clothes have to be fit on a different body.
Yeah.
How did that work in changing how you fit things? And has it influenced at all the way you fit your main collection?
I didn't even notice a difference, actually, because it was their standard, so you just worked with it, and it wasn't hard at all. And then with ours, we just start from a certain point. I think sometimes our clothes are fitted, they just, depending on what we build them on, they have a different fit. So sometimes we do things on organza, and then you know that it's one size, it's not going to shift, and then sometimes we'll do something on a tulle, and then it, it can stretch. So it just depends what it is.
And can I ask, in your early collections, you often didn't have patterns. Do you have patterns for everything you make now?
No.
Oh, that's going to be good for the archives.
We have all of our pieces, and then but I don't have I have a few patterns, some things.
So how much of your collection now, if any, is industrially produced of your main collection? Do you hand off anything?
No.
Okay. Not yet.
Oh,
Well, you had machines do the knit of the sweaters at some. You had a machine for some of the sweaters you were doing, right? They weren't all hand knit.
no, we only did, I think,
Did
let
you
me
have
think,
that?
hold on. We did a machine knit bra this season.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's moving forward.
Well, everyone asked me about that cashmere bra, so it must have been a good one.
The next, sorry.
So who actually sews the garments?
We have teams that do separate things. Well, I take that back because we did leather jackets, and we had to do that at a leather production facility. But we have our main team that does all of our dresses, kind of.
They
I
come
think it's
in
divided.
before the show to start working.
We just work with. It's just like your family, kind of. So you just work all the time together.
10 people?
With the main clothes, I'd say there's like 3. And then for knitwear, we have like a main person and then like a team of people that do it in production. But when we do samples, there's just one person.
And do you have to train the people you work with in LA to do this, or have you found amazingly talented people out there who just make these incredibly complicated things?
I think it's kind of like a process where you need more people and then they have to train. But then the people that you end up working with have the same kind of. Whoever you work with when you're sewing, or you learn to have a dialogue that their stitch may be different than someone else's hand stitch. So you just, they end up having to know what you like, if that makes sense. So I always know, like, if you're draping something and we started working with someone new and they just weren't getting that we don't like things that look tight and we like it to look really soft and very light, like you didn't touch it. But it took a long time to make them stop doing that and putting thousands of stitches versus just a few. So it's kind of just like, trade-off.
I guess it's back and then we'll go forward. So there, yeah. Then we'll move forward.
I was just wondering, it seems to me that a lot of female designers often design clothes that they want to wear every day. So Donna Karan or Jill Sander or whomever, like, just when I think about them, I think that they wear their clothes every day and it's a lifestyle of sorts. But you don't seem to wear your clothes, like the beautiful dresses. I don't ever see you or your sister wearing them. Maybe I think one photo in Vogue you wore your dress. But I was just wondering how you think about that and if you think of it more as like, I'm making art, or like just why you decided to make clothes like that instead of what you wanted to wear every day, I guess.
I think it's a really good question because there aren't a lot of female designers, and I think about that all the time. I kind of feel like there's this standard. You're either a stylist as a female designer, or you're dressing yourself, and there's amazing representations of that. There's Miuccia Prada, there was Coco Chanel, Schiaparelli. I mean, there's amazing female figures that wanted to build things that they wanted to wear. I just don't have, I don't know why. It's just not, I don't want to wear my own clothes. I think there's like a few things I would wear.
Would you wear the leather jacket?
I don't think so. And I love leather jackets. If I put one on, it'd be like it's too black. I don't know. I guess there's things that you like to wear and you feel they look good on you. I like simple clothes, but I don't like to make simple clothes. So there's this huge divide.
Do you feel it's unfair that women designers are supposed to be seen this way? I mean, that men get a break on that because they can't wear the clothes? Or if they do, it might be deemed
I don't think it's
unusual.
unfair. I don't think it's unfair. I do feel, if I were being completely honest, that there's a huge divide between the way a male designer and a female designer is treated, and what people expect from them. So I think that that's where I feel more discomfort than anything else.
Okay, we had one here and then back, so you're good. We'll move
I
forward.
just wanted to know, what is your favorite thing to wear?
I've had
every
this
day.
sweater for 7 years, and I got it at Sears. I wear gray t-shirts to work every day, and like usually a sweatshirt.
You've got a shirt like this.
And I have a shirt like this that I wear all the time. And so I wear either stripes or plain things, like navy, white, gray. That's like the color palette I like.
You had a question in the front.
Hi. I have a tremendous respect for your line, and I just wanted to say that it's interesting that there's this shift towards American couture that's coming out more recently, and I was wondering where you project the future of American couture going, because it's something so new.
Well, I'm not good at predictions, but I think there's always been a tradition of it. And we had Hollywood, we had a huge industry of people that were setting trends. I think couture, I always thought about couture as, well, when it was in its heyday, it was setting trends for ready to wear, or like things coming out later, what people would wear and, you know, have made for themselves. And then you had the shift with YSL, and you know, things changed. And I feel as though everything, you know, with the internet and everything changing so much with the industry of, you know, in music, and so it's not just our industry, it's every industry, things happen so quickly. I would assume naturally that people will fight against it at some point and want things that are more special. I mean, maybe that's hopeful, but I just think that people in general, when things are taken away, want something back. So it's kind of, I would think that people would kind of celebrate that more.
Well, I mean, that is the issue with the fast fashion. I mean,
Yeah.
and you've obviously, you know, partaken of the fast fashion, you know, fast fashion interest. But I know that you and your sister are both, if not critical, skeptical of the result of what that will mean.
I think it's hard when fast fashion. I think it's hard for designers because there's so many things contributing into it. Whether it's that, you know, a huge company can knock something off very quickly after a show, or it's and then, you know, take all the profit from it, or it's just this you know, stores wanting things too early, and then they, you know, people settle on production. And I think there's this a huge cycle. It's just beyond the idea of fast fashion, you know, wanting clothes in July that should be in November. So there's that. I think that really has hurt everybody overall.
The seasonal dysfunction, as we call it.
I know. I argue with them every season. I'm like, well, you know, you're not getting this that early.
But your customer, actually, the women who buy your clothes are the sort of women who don't wait.
Yeah.
Who do want it as soon as it's off the runway. Isn't that your? You know, you just showed a fall collection, which I would say is. It's not a cold weather collection. What you just showed. I mean, you show seasonless things.
I just don't think there's that much cold weather, though. Because
Have you been outside?
it's cold here, but I mean,
Yeah, in most of the country, it's not.
I don't live in cold weather at all, and I know a lot of people don't either. And I don't think about fashion as having these. I think seasons are chaotic now, anyways. Like, we've probably destroyed our environment enough that there isn't like this crazy winter now that you have to go buy a coat for. You probably could get your coat a couple of years earlier and then use it for a long time. So I'd rather make a pretty dress.
One more.
said just before about what you wear
Yeah.
versus what you're designing. It's
Yeah.
very interesting. I just assumed that you were designing with yourself in mind.
Yeah.
So, okay, clearly you're not. Could you just talk about do you have a customer in mind, or do you just make things because you want to make that?
I think this is something that someone asked me this the other day, and I had a hard time answering it. Because I think traditionally when designers are asked to talk about their client, they have this person that they like roll out, there's a lot of adjectives you could use to describe this person. And there's like a muse that they are always thinking about. And I could not do that at all. So for me, I think the person I design, really when we're designing, it's about usually an idea. So it's not about this person. I usually have to talk about the person in the show as though she exists. So it's like, like I was saying, they might have their brother's sweater or something. I don't know. But in terms of the client, I think usually it's just, probably an intelligent woman, someone that was interested in all aspects of, fashion or art or, I think that's pretty much it. I think and that's a lot of people.
But what pushes the proposition of fashion forward for you? For some people, I think of, someone like, probably Nicolas Ghesquière. It's probably silhouette.
Yeah.
He's pushing silhouette at the end of the day, but it's I'm going to change the line each season a little bit this, or things are moving. Is it the mood, the line, the texture? What is it for you that every season feels newer and different?
That's hard. I know it's not silhouette because I never think about it. I think it's usually the idea that seems different, and then you want to create things that will make someone understand an idea. So whether the fabrication of something or the color, I think that just starts to come out of it. But it's not silhouette, and it's not like pulling from an era of fashion. Oh, and I have another part of that. Another part I was just thinking about. I'm a girl, so it's very different for me to talk about females as if they're like this client that you're. Right. That's what it was, because someone was like, well, why Estelle, wanted to change a woman's life and all this stuff, and I'm like, well, I am a female, and I can't really talk about women like as though they're these objects that I want to dress. It doesn't seem right, because like girls wear clothes because you are identifying who you are, and like you have a personality, and you might wear pink because you really want people to notice you, or you're really a feminine dresser. I just don't have that relationship to clothing.
And also, you've dressed men. There's Justin Bond.
I
There's
do
the
have
New
guys
York
that wear my
Times
clothes.
recently did that amazing Ryan McGinley portfolio.
And we did. David Armstrong did this whole portfolio of past dresses we had on different men. They looked so beautiful. So I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that question. It's really hard for me.
Is there a question over here? Somewhere I felt there was a hand. A very low hand.
Yeah.
I think how lots of brands imitate other famous brands.
Mm-hmm.
Like there may be some brands imitating Chanel or Valentino.
Yeah.
Do you ever look up to a brand and try to make your clothes like that?
No.
But are there brands you respect?
Yes. I respect anyone that can do this job.
But when you were when you were in your junior year and Kate didn't want to work in an art gallery, which brands in fashion interested you? Not to wear, but to think about. Who did you respect?
I think the first person I really reacted to strongly, I was really young, was Galliano. I remember it was exciting for me because over the years you learn where everyone pulls from things and different, but he was my first obsession. And then Vivienne Westwood. And high school I was obsessed with Prada. But with older, so that would be contemporary, and then older I would love anybody. I love anyone that made clothing. Everyone did something so magically. Like if you look at the old Lanvin pieces, I think that Albert does an amazing job. He took that house and made it his, but then really kept the delicate nature that she had. And there's something very childlike about what she made, and something he keeps that. And I love his work too. And I love Chanel. That's my favorite. Chanel Couture. My favorite collection of all time is the Marie Antoinette Chanel Couture show. It's so beautiful.
Back there? You?
One follow-up question. I was just curious why, how you thought about when you first sat down and you were like, okay, we're going to start making clothes, why you decided to focus on evening and really beautiful dresses instead of like, I don't know, every day like a pant or a top or even jackets or anything else. Why dresses?
I think that that's a hard question because you don't really know. The first 10 pieces we made, everyone saw kind of. I mean, not everyone, but it was like we showed it kind of in a small way. And I think there's two things to that. One, we learned that you just do what comes naturally to you. So if you don't fight that, you know immediately what it is that you would create with your, if you were blindfolded, I would do a gown. It's my favorite thing to do, and you don't do a lot of them in a show, but I find it the most freeing piece to make because it's, from your shoulder to the floor, you can do anything you want. And then for a dress, I think it was just it was the natural thing for us to do. I wasn't designing pants, even though I wear pants all the time. It was just, and it took us a long time for me to be comfortable doing pants. So I kind of approached it as like every season, hopefully we could,
Every season you talk about the pant.
we would do something, we would work harder at it.
Yeah.
Like last season, I was really happy with our pant, and it was our bestseller from fall, late spring, from spring. But that took us a long time because it wasn't natural for us. Like I wasn't a natural pant designer. So it was just, you work at it if you don't feel comfortable doing it.
Is there anyone else? Oh my God, there's lots of here.
How much of the sewing on the dresses upstairs has been done by hand, and how much time do you spend considering the interior construction of the garments?
On the pieces upstairs, okay, well, you use machine sewing too, all the time. So there's a lot. But I think in general, I guess all of it. If we had to, I could tell you how each one was made if I could remember. I don't remember all the pieces, but you can't do them a certain way. Basically, the reason why we make clothing the way we do is not because that was the goal. It was just to make something look a certain way, you can't use certain techniques. So the interesting thing is to see a piece being put together because you'd see how many pins hold it together. Like there's thousands of pins that you use on every dress, and it's really beautiful. But at the end, the idea is that you wouldn't even know that it took so long to make. I think the longest one is the gown.
Star Wars?
Yeah, the colored gown, because that, construction-wise, it took forever, and then the dyeing, that took probably like 2 weeks to dye it and to get it right. And we work with an extraordinary dyer, but that was just, I remember, this is so funny. Kate had left for New York, and I'm usually in LA for a couple days before by myself finishing, just like making sure everything gets done. And that season, the gowns, like the dyeing had taken so long that we had 3 gowns to do, and they were mapped out how we would build them, but we didn't have the fabric done yet. And I got these 3 piles back, and I thought, oh my God, these colors what were we thinking? The purple on top of the blue and the orange was so shocking in these little piles, because you get them back in these huge tubs. And I had this severe panic attack about them. It's like, these colors are so awful, but they turned out really beautifully.
The Star Wars dresses.
They're like colored, purple.
In the back there? Yeah.
we've learned a bit about your process through the talk, and I'm kind of interested to know what continues to motivate you, because we know what inspires you, but as a designer, you've kind of discussed your customer and yourself and how you relate to the clothes, but how do you maintain motivated? And also, where do you see this company kind of growing, and what do you imagine it being, in a few years?
I think motivation kind of comes from, the thing about fashion is that it moves very quickly and you can't help. If you're somewhat, I think, Kate and I are really judgmental of our work and kind of, I think it's very easy to critique your own work without having to worry about how other people see it. So if you feel in the smallest way unsatisfied with something you did, it's very easy to want to do better. So I just approach it as being like, well, is it going to be better than last season? Hopefully, and then hopefully it is. And you just kind of want to, and it's set up so that you have this huge rush of adrenaline, and then you go through a depression after a show, and you get all sad because all your friends leave, and you have to do sales. And so by the time that's all over, you kind of want to do something new anyways. And then for the, I just kind of see wanting to do everything. So I never think about doing something in a small way, even though we do it that way. So I know that it'll grow eventually, but it's just probably going to take time to make everything that we want to make. But I'm not scared of taking time to do something, and I think that's the key. And maybe this goes back to your question, but I think that, not being willing, I think the only thing that you can do is, risk a lot, but then know that you don't have to do things as quickly as people want you to.
Also, you're still completely independent, so you can do it on your time frame. So many designers are hobbled by the expectations of their backers or their companies or the industries that are reliant on them. So in a way, as long as you retain that, you can grow it as quickly or as slowly as you want.
Yeah. I just don't think you can grow things that fast, because if it took us this long to feel comfortable doing a pant, how could you do everything that quickly? It just doesn't even make sense.
Well, also in the history of, the recent history of fashion, things that grow slower are the things that last. I think Rick Owens was in LA in business for 10 years before anyone in New York had ever heard of him, and it's one of the most successful independent houses now in Paris. And also, again, someone from LA, from the outside.
LA.
I remember him saying, I'm 40, I got a bust a move, I got to do something. And I mean, he was 40 before it even began to work in the way that it now works. And Dries as well. It took a long time for Dries Van Noten to have the business he has now. Oftentimes, I think we don't allow designers that anymore. People come out and they have to be big from the start, and they have to perform in ways that, it's not only that they're not equipped to perform, and the public isn't ready to, be at that party in those numbers consistently. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
You don't want to make clothes that fall, that end up on a remainder rack. It's not worth it. Okay, I don't know. Do we have time for more? Where are we? I don't want to watch.
One more question.
Okay, one more in the very back.
Would you please talk about the extent to which you're involved in the daily workings of your business, and if not,
have somebody who runs the business aspect?
Well, we do everything. So my dad does our bookkeeping for us, because I think that's the division.
Your mom makes some jewelry.
My mom makes some jewelry, and Kate and I do everything else. So there isn't really that much of a divide. We handle it all. So that's actually been very good for us too, because we make creative choices all the time, and we see the repercussions if we make a bad decision, and you learn, it's a lot of jobs to be doing at once, and it's overwhelming. So, but you've got to be willing to work long hours to do this, and to do it. I think hopefully to do it well enough that you're paying attention to all of the, when your fabric doesn't show up and you haven't tracked it. Even things like that. We get a lot of interns, and I'm like, and sometimes they get upset because they're like, well, I want to do something creative. And I'm like, well, most of the time you're not doing creative things, trust me.
Can I just ask why you wouldn't hire somebody to handle some of those nuts and bolts so that it freed you up to be have more creative time?
Back of money?
I think that that's just a money question. Our money goes to other places, so if the opportunity afforded itself where you could have more people doing those jobs, then you definitely would want them. But until we have, money to hire like a huge staff, it just becomes a responsibility of us.
This is the main. This is a central question for any emerging designer, and often the luckiest ones are people whose best friends just happen to want to be in the business of fashion, so they come up together. The two men who do Proenza Scholar have Shirley, and for some reason Shirley has decided that this is her role, and God bless her for it.
Yeah.
And most famously, Marc Jacobs has Robert Duffy, who's been with him from the very, very outset when he was making sweaters, and is still with him, building that company and protecting him. But often if it doesn't start like that, you can't impose it later. It's just, it's really hard to have that much trust and that much faith in a vision. Mm-hmm. Don't you think? I mean, it's tricky. How would you even begin to find someone who could get between you and your sister? It's,
I don't know.
It's that old, like...
That's like having a third mind instead of a second, and I think that's having a second mind, but three, that's hard to find, I think. But I think, ideally you want it, so I'm not saying I don't want that. But I'm willing to do the work in between, so it's all right.
Thank you all for coming.